Listen up, fellow babies. This is Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser, the deep dive, history nerd, WKRP in Cincinnati watch-along podcast. I am, as always, Mike Grasso, and with me, as always, is Rob McDougall.
Hello, Cincinnati.
Well, today we're going to take a look at a two-parter. Our first two-parter since the pilot, now that I think about it. It's Goodbye Johnny, and Johnny Comes Back. And we've said this many, many weeks, Rob. The titles of these episodes are delightfully succinct and descriptive.
That's right, they are. And in this case, the title of the one completely removes any of the suspense created by the title of the other. Goodbye Johnny, Johnny Comes Back. I don't know, in 1979, I'm not sure people were really keeping track of or aware of the titles of sitcom episodes they were watching.
I will say that most of the time in your handy TV guide,
yes,
they definitely had the titles not on the grid, but in the individual descriptions. And so,
in the handy-dandy listing of the TV guide, that's true. So if you took your television watching seriously and read the guide ahead of time to plan out how you were going to navigate the three networks for that week,
don't forget your UHF stations, because
that's right. Your UHF stations. Yeah, I think we want to have some sort of just appreciation for TV guides, and I'm picturing the white on black of the regular channels and the black on white of the UHF stations. And
so let's put it this way: we have another 45-minute podcast and us just talking about TV guide probably. So let's table that one for a while.
We'll stick a pin in that.
But I know I'd love
to
do it.
Stick a pin in that. Right. So the first episode, Goodbye Johnny. Johnny Fever gets a job offer at a station back in Los Angeles, at the rival of the station that fired him back when he was at the top for saying booger on the air. And the episode follows everyone in the station reacting to this news and culminates in them staging a big going-away banquet for Johnny, the real agenda of which is to try and get Johnny to stay.
I'd like to begin by saying that I thought we were supposed to bring our wives. I mean, if I'd have known none of you were bringing your wives, I wouldn't have brought mine. John, you're really great. We're going to miss you. Oh, please don't go. How's that?
Great, Herb. Real fun.
One of the things I noticed is that, Johnny really believes like he deserves to be back in L.A. I mean, he's been down for a long time. This opportunity comes up, and he just grabs it with both hands. And I put in here, in my notes, this is foreshadowing to the Riptide episodes where he becomes the big disco host in Cincinnati. Sort of this desire Johnny has to be bigger than what he's been sort of set up for.
Could be. If we're treating this as a real world and trying to imagine all these things making actual logical sense, it raises a question of kind of how good Johnny is at his job and how popular he is. Why is he getting this offer now? Is it that now that WKRP's format has changed, he's kind of hot and people are listening and really liking what he's doing? Because, we don't see him get the job offer. It's sort of oddly off screen. Mm-hmm. And then in the way everyone reacts, in Andy's shock and dismay when Johnny gets the job, and the way everybody in the station reacts, they're gutted at the thought of losing Johnny. Is this just because they all really like him and they're close friends? The way Andy and Mr. Carlson talk, it's implied that Johnny really is an asset to the station. And I'm curious about that. Is Johnny really an asset to the station? We love him as the viewers, mm-hmm. but we have had no evidence as of yet that the ratings have turned around, that the station is popular.
Yeah, and I love that sort of Freudian slip you just had there, that the show is popular, because I really like the idea of thinking of if the station looks at Johnny as their breakout, we also have to realize that the character of Johnny, and thus Howard Hessman, was the breakout of WKRP itself. And, this fits in with a lot of the stuff we've talked about. If Johnny left, WKRP would fall apart, the station, not the show. But if Howard Hessman were to have left at the end of the first season, Rob, this would be, well, first of all, this would be another one of our alternative WKRPs, but it would also be, I think, disastrous for the show.
Yeah.
Finding its feet.
Yeah. Now, I don't think we have any reason to think that was a likely possibility, but it is true that, one of the meta off-camera things that is happening right now is that now WKRP, in terms of its success, has hit its stride. We're in the second half of the first season, and they're actually in the best time slot they will ever have for the whole life of the show. Remember, the WKRP gets booted all around, up and down the dial, so to speak, up and down the TV Guide schedule by CBS. It had something like 11 time slots in its 4 years on the air.
Wow.
But this second half of the first season, it's on Tuesday nights at 9:30 after MASH.
Right.
And that's the best spot in the week. That's the spot that Hugh Wilson always wanted. He thought that the show worked much better as a 9:30 show than an 8 o'clock show. A slightly older audience, older demographics, and then having the lead-in of MASH, probably one of the top shows on the network. Yeah, this is its top ratings and its best position right now. There's almost an inverse relationship between the fictional WKRP's ratings and the actual TV show's ratings, that as the show goes on, the station will start to do better and better, but the show's real-life ratings are going to decay.
Oh, still crazy. Oh, these years.
10 years ago, this was the Big Red Machine, they call it, the Cincinnati Reds, the dominant baseball team in the game. They were led by Pete Rose. The Reds were World Series champs in 75 and 76, but those glory years faded, and in recent years, the Reds have been dead, finishing last in 1983 and next to last in 84.
So, Rob, you talked about the big guy and Andy being dismayed that Johnny's leaving. This reminded me of something I didn't get to mention from last week's episodes, which was the big guy feeling really sad that Pete Rose was leaving Cincinnati for more money. And it's an echo, isn't it? I mean, the real life Pete Rose actually did leave the Cincinnati Reds to go to the Philadelphia Phillies. I loved the dismay in the big guy's voice, but Philadelphia? Like this idea that somebody he loved, and remember, Pete Rose was a native son of Cincinnati, so like for him to leave the Reds at the height of their Big Red Machine was just huge. And so you see the big guy having to go through another departure of a big name for more money to a major city and a major market. And it does kind of get you that great anxiety about being, sort of stuck in Cincinnati, I guess.
Well, the Reds practice is over for today, and with opening day just a little over 3.5 weeks away, most of the so-called experts really don't give Cincinnati much of a chance to be in the thick of things come September. But the Cincinnati Reds fans have hope. Why? Because after watching number 14 hustle down to first base for over 2 decades, they have learned one thing for sure, and that is never bet against Pete Rose.
Still crazy. Oh, still crazy.
So we were talking about the big guy's reaction, and, as usual, all of the great sort of like business talk of the station happens in the big guy's office. So, as usual, Andy and the big guy are having a conversation about one thing, and then I know both of us were really amused by Herb and Bailey coming in.
Yes.
Having their own little argument about an ad for a pet store.
Yes, actually, up until that moment, I was not even certain if I had seen this episode before, because I remembered so little of it.
Right.
But absolutely, in the 35 intervening years, I have not forgotten unwanted baby chicks. Kind of a silly bit, but Bonner totally sells it with his conviction. Also, the big guy, speaking of the scene in his office, is before anyone comes in, he's playing with his pen set, playing Machine Gun with his pen set, spinning around in his swivel chair.
It kind of makes his drunken confession later at the banquet about Guadalcanal actually a little bit poignant, but
that's true.
It's the second time in a row we see the big guy, again, playing with something in his desk. I can't help but think the directors of the episodes were just like, okay, Gordon, here's your desk. Here's the stuff on your desk. Go to it.
And, nice interplay between Herb and Bailey. Bailey, a lot tougher now, sticking up for herself, sticking up to Herb.
Yeah.
And I think the show is really figuring out, as we get into this back half of the first season, all these different character relationships are really starting to click. And some of the things that seemed off or weird in the earlier episodes are now, we're figuring them out. So Bailey standing up to Herb, it's kind of hot. Angry Bailey.
But Rob, let's ask the question this week. What is Bailey wearing?
Oh, that's true. That's true. Well, it's only the hotness is mitigated by sort of a burgundy turtleneck that is marred by this atrocious knit vest kind of a thing.
Yeah, so I have 2 comments on that. One, I put in the notes, which, you asked, what's Bailey wearing? And I said, she is wearing my mom's wardrobe from around 1982. But it's also, I look at those colors, right? people have to realize the early 80s, and this is still late 70s, obviously, but the late 70s, early 80s, the early 80s were not neon. The early 80s were earth tones. They were beiges and maroons and pale, sort of like khaki and like all of these sort of like, even interior decoration, was brown and beige and sort of like this very muted color palette. And that's definitely what Bailey's rocking here. She looks like something out of the Sears catalog of like circa 1981. So
sure. And hey, I don't want to cast aspersions on what your mom was wearing. My mom dressed the same way, and our moms are both great friends of the podcast.
They are, yes.
Shout out to our moms. We're not.
I wonder if we could get them on for a sort of fashion, review at some point to look at what everyone wears on this show. And
that's not a bad idea.
Ask them if the offices they worked in, if all the men were wearing three-piece suits around the end of the 70s and beginning of the 80s.
Yeah, and we shouldn't even pick on Bailey. The men's fashions are, of course, ridiculous. It almost goes without saying. I'm pretty inured to how Herb dresses, to how Venus dresses. I get the joke, but I don't generally remark on it. But actually, in this scene, a few minutes later, Venus pops in, and boy, oh boy, I mean, that giant fur coat and green fedora combination and his, I think, dog tags glinting in the light.
I didn't catch that. Oh, talk about foreshadowing. We're only going to be a few more episodes before we find out the secret origin of Venus Flytrap. Wow.
Yeah, but he outdoes himself with his fashion choices today. And then Herb's tux in the dinner scene at the end of the episode is really something too. It's sort of frilly pink and blue combination. Yeah, maybe we should lay off Bailey because they're all rocking it today.
Good point. So, Rob, I have a proposition for you. If I were to post pictures of my dad's wedding party from 1973 on the blog show notes, if you could find an equally embarrassing family photo from the mid to early 70s, I think that would be an awesome visual compliment to the episode.
It's probably more fair to inflict it on myself. I can find embarrassing photos of myself from the 1970s, no problem.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
My parents, you look at the pictures of them from the 60s, and they're actually, I find them super cool.
Do you remember that ad campaign that came out a few years ago?
Exactly. The Canadian Club or Crown Royal or whatever, your dad series, that's what I think of every time I see a picture of my parents from those days.
My parents, I think, were a little less cool on that front, but I will say, yes, I had the same ringer tee that every 4-year-old was wearing in 1979. But it was blue and red. It was like what every kid on Sesame Street basically wore when they were talking to Grover. Red and blue striped ringer T-shirt, bowl haircut. It's like, yes, you're in 1979. This is what a kid will wear. It's very reassuring to see in those old photos exactly.
And you would just wear that tee and stand around behind a 2 or 3 foot tall brick wall and wonder why Grover or Cookie Monster weren't showing up to discuss the letter Q with you.
Where are the Muppets? They're supposed to be talking to me and educating me about numbers and stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Hey, John?
What?
And Sherlock, you want to count?
Oh, yes.
John, you want to count?
Yeah.
Okay, I tell you what, I'll start first and you second.
Sherlock.
What?
Sherlock.
Yes, John.
Want count?
Oh, I'd love to count.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
That was terrific!
Yeah, that's fantastic, John.
Yeah.
There's a way in which, yes, I think the show is acknowledging Howard Hessman's breakout status, that he's the character that has really caught on. It's interesting for this particular episode to acknowledge that, because I think, and I actually take this observation from, there's a Canadian journalist, TV writer named Jamie Weinman, who really, he's a great friend to WKRP. He's one of the WKRP experts on the internet. He's in the dark years of syndication before the Shout Factory DVDs. Jamie was the guy who kind of painstakingly pieced together the original versions of the episodes. Anyway, Weinman says, for him, this episode kind of marks the point at which the show becomes a true ensemble and realizes that it's not the Gordon Jump, Gary Sandy show.
Yeah.
Realizes what a thing they have in this ensemble cast. And the moment, if you want a specific moment to mark that, the kind of coming together of the cast as something bigger than the sum of its parts, it's got to be the banquet with this great long tracking shot. Everybody, the entire cast sitting along a long table, all on one side of the long table, as if it was the Last Supper,
or Knights of the Dinner Table.
Right, that's right. This long tracking shot of every single one of them engaged in conversation at the banquet, and then each one of them coming up to give a speech. It's a great.
Oh yeah.
Every one of them gets a moment. Every one of them gets a bit, and it's a terrific set piece.
Yeah, I mean, in my notes and visually, just while I was watching it, the first thing that came to mind was Robert Altman.
Right.
This is a very Altman-esque kind of... I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson couldn't have done it better. I mean, basically, when you look at this scene and you juxtapose it with Boogie Nights and Becky Barnett's wedding, and they kind of go along the table and visit with everybody as they're,
overlapping conversations. Yeah, no, it within the constraints of sitcom budgets, it has that real feel of the sort of Altman kind of long tracking shot or whatever.
Yeah. It's fantastic. We also meet Lucille for the first time. I know both of us really want to talk about Edie McClurg, but we're gonna wait because she has a bigger episode coming up.
That's right. Let me say the great Edie McClurg makes her debut as Herb's wife here, and Herb's wife Lucille. And of course, you know her from a million other things, and we will have an appreciation of Edie McClurg because I can talk about her for ages.
Yep, and I know our listeners who have been commenting assiduously on the blog will probably say something if we don't at least mention the fact that she's in this episode.
That's right. But just to the sort of how indelible an impression you can make. If you had asked me before I looked it up, how many episodes of WKRP is Lucille in? Is Edie McClurg in?
Right.
I might have guessed like a dozen or something.
Right.
She's in 3.
She's
in 3 episodes of WKRP. She's in this one. She's in Never Leave Me, Lucille, which we're going to do next week, and she's in The Real Families, and that's it.
Wow.
And she makes such an outsized impression that I would have thought that she's like the next biggest person on the cast. Maybe after Mama.
That's crazy. I did not know that at all.
Yeah.
I remember the line, I thought we were supposed to bring our wives, really, like anything that's kind of shticky, I remember from childhood. Like, the unwanted baby chicks, I remember very, very well. And I thought we were supposed to bring our wives. I think it might have even become like an in-joke in my family at some point. You know what I mean?
That's often quoted among my WKRP loving friends. I swear to God, I thought we were supposed to bring our wives. Only one other character at that dinner has a wife, so I don't know how having Carmen there would have really changed things. But yes, a great refrain from Herb, kind of cruel, and just, again, fair warning, I'm going to be singing the praises of Edie McClurg, but just her performance, all of her performances are always utterly without vanity. The only bit she gets to do here really is to,
be loud and want strawberry cake, basically.
Be loud and want more dessert, exactly, and get dissed by Herb, but still, she's kind of magnetic.
Yeah.
So, you always start with an amusing story. Once you've got the audience laughing, they're putty in your hands.
Right.
Now, where are your 3x5 cards?
Well, I don't have any.
You don't have any?
No, Les, I didn't think that I was supposed to bring some.
There I was, you see, at Guadalcanal, or maybe it was Mindanao. I don't know, but the Japanese were all over the place.
Were you on vacation?
We better get going before we lose the big guy, huh?
I think we might have lost him already.
And the cheese puff was just scrumptious.
Honest, Andy, I thought we were supposed to bring our wives.
It's okay, Herb.
John, I thought we were supposed to bring wives.
It's okay, Herb.
So you're off to Southern California.
Yeah.
Is that a real butter patty there?
So we should talk a little bit, again, sort of the structure of the banquet. Everybody's going to give their testimonial. So one of the things that I noticed right off is that as we first pan onto the table, we've got Les, I think, sitting with Bailey. And Les has his notes. And his usual speech, of course, about the communist menace in your backyard can't be used for saying goodbye to Johnny. But we find out that Les is a speechmaker and Toastmaster. And later on during the banquet, we find out that the big guy, who's utterly schnockered, which I thought was adorable. I mean, I think him getting drunk at a banquet is just like, probably it's the cutest drunk I think I've ever seen. You know what I mean? He says that he's a Rotarian. So we've got Les, who belongs to an organization. We've got the big guy that belongs to an organization. They're both part of the Suits contingent at the station. So, Rob, that really leaped out at me because I can't picture any of the younger people at the station belonging to any kind of like fraternal organization. The thing I thought about was, of course, the change that's happened in our culture since the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, so this is another example of WKRP really loving and being very good at a particular milieu, a kind of Midwestern, Middle American, mid-sized city.
Yeah.
This world of middle-class clubs and joiners, Toastmasters and Rotarians, and the Lions Club, and the Elks, and the 4-H Club, and the Shriners, and the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, if you want to get on the occult side of things. A world of clubs, a world where middle-class men get together and network and maybe raise money for charity and then go bowling and get drunk.
Tonight, we are here to commemorate our glorious society's 1500th anniversary. And in honor of this momentous occasion, we're having ribs.
Yeah, I mean, and as I was saying earlier, it's kind of a thing that is no longer a thing. You know, we've talked about what was this a thing in this time period.
Yeah.
And that opportunity, I think, has gone away. And I think a lot of these organizations, you know, I hear Mason commercials on the radio constantly. You know, they're begging for people to do it.
When the Freemasons are advertising, you know, something's gone wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
When the Illuminati are looking for new members or having membership drives, then something's gone wrong. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the overarching argument that you're alluding to is there's this theory about the decline of social capital in America. And a number of people have looked at that and worked on this, but the book that really nailed it in the public consciousness was a book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. Putnam's a sociologist, political scientist who he argued that he looked at ways in which Americans have disengaged from political involvement, things like voter turnout, but also just Americans used to be involved in a much greater number of organized activities that were outside of home and outside of work, third space activities.
Okay.
Everything from unions, which we've talked about before, religious groups, PTAs, women's clubs, even things like sports leagues and bowling leagues, which gives him his title, organized bowling leagues.
Right.
And in the early and mid 20th century, Americans were ferocious joiners of clubs like this, that there were lots of these organizations and that people were really active in these third spaces that are not home and not the workplace. So the argument is that Americans don't do things in groups anymore. And Canadians don't either, but we were never such good joiners in the first place, I think.
That's interesting. I'd be interested to hear more about that.
And Putnam says that this decline in social capital leads to a decline in the whole social fabric, political participation and civic life and democratic citizenship.
Yeah. And my sort of not counter argument, but let's say complementary argument to that is that if you work in a middle-class, white-collar office job, you're never away from your desk anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What it is, basically, it's just sort of that workplace monster kind of encroaching on the space that we used to give back. Yeah. And again, it doesn't have to be a civic organization, you know, necessarily. It's so funny, we talk about the Bowling Alone and the title of the book, and automatically, we're talking about sitcoms, I think of two legendary sitcom patriarchs who are almost identified because they are avid bowlers, and that's Fred Flintstone and Homer Simpson, both animated, unreal cartoon patriarchs, but we identify them.
Both of those guys and their bowling aren't they sort of riffs on Jackie Gleason in The Honeymooners? Yeah.
Sure, absolutely, and there you go. You go back to the sort of the root of it all, but the thing is, like for the baby boomers and Gen Xers to identify with those two, you know, again patriarchs, they have a life outside of work. When the whistle blows, Fred runs home in his car. Homer gets to go home or go to Moe's.
Yeah, both shows start with the whistle blowing.
And I just don't, it's so unrealistic now to think of a millennial dad figure, and I don't watch a lot of sitcoms right now, so I don't know who the quintessential, maybe it's still Homer Simpson in season 26. But
what was Fred Flintstone's fraternal order? The Water Buffaloes?
The Loyal Order of Water Buffaloes. Yes, exactly. So he actually had both recreational and fraternal organizations that he belonged to.
Over the line!
Huh?
I'm sorry, Smokey. You were over the line. That's a foul.
Bullshit. Mark it 8, dude.
Excuse me. Mark it 0, next frame.
Bullshit, Walter. Mark it 8, dude.
Smokey, this is not Nam. This is bowling. There are rules.
Hey, Walter, come on. Hey, man, it's Smokey, so his toe slipped over a little, you know? It's just a game, man.
This is a league game. This determines who enters the next round robin. Am I wrong?
Yeah, but I wasn't...
Am I wrong?
Yeah, but I wasn't over. Give me the marker, dude. I'm marking an 8.
Smokey, my friend, you're entering a world of pain.
Walter, man.
You mark that frame an 8, you're entering a world of pain.
I'm not.
A world of pain.
Look, dude, this is your partner.
Has the whole world gone crazy? Am I the only one around here who gives a shit about the rules? Market zero!
They're calling the cops, man. Put the piece away.
Market zero!
Walter, put the piece away.
Walter?
You think I'm fucking around here? Market zero!
All right, it's fucking zero. You happy, you crazy fuck?
The league game smoke.
Yeah, so sitcoms today, you know, and when I say today, I mean the late 1990s, because that's the date that it is in my head. Think about how many of them are set in, like, coffee shops.
Sure.
Right?
I mean, we think about Friends, but even Seinfeld.
Friends, Seinfeld.
Their major non-Jerry apartment set is Monk's. So.
Right. So social capital was all about this third space, the place that is not home and is not work. And this, especially in the 90s, but still to this day, this has long been Starbucks' stated goal, to be the third space. That's like, they use that phrase in their, corporate planning, that Starbucks wants to be the space that is not home and not work.
Right.
I mean, a coffee shop, of course, is not the same thing as a bowling league or a union or a Toastmasters club. It is a private establishment, right? So Starbucks is colonizing the third space. You know, if you're confused as to whether Starbucks is a public space or a private space, just try starting a political protest there. And you will quickly learn which it is.
Well, that ties into something I was thinking about, because, I mean, they say the American Revolution started in coffee shops. They say that the Glorious Revolution in England started in coffee shops. And that is a very different sort of vibe than the coffee shop today, because when I go into a Starbucks, I don't see people having excited, animated discussions. Everybody's on their goddamn computer.
Well,
having a conference call or like working on something on their own, basically.
Oh yeah, absolutely. A bunch of things I could say there. Yes, there's the great story of the sort of the coffee shop revolution and how coffee shops in early modern England and early modern France too, before the revolution, the French Revolution, were places that fomented liberal thought and intellectual debate, and even the coffee itself. When people stopped drinking beer at every hour of the day and started drinking coffee, basically after a centuries-long bender, the Renaissance is everyone starts drinking coffee and suddenly pop, intellectual revolutions everywhere. Yeah. But I'm going to circle back to what you said about everyone on their laptops in Starbucks. I remember this great interview with George Meyer, who was the head writer for The Simpsons.
Simpsons, right, yeah.
Really during its heyday. And he was talking about the zany sitcoms of the Silver Age and how he tried to recapture that strangeness on The Simpsons, right? And he said he remembered watching an episode of Get Smart when he was about 10 years old. And in this episode, a group of Native Americans were going to destroy Washington, D.C. by firing a giant bow and arrow at it. Because they're Native Americans, right? A bow and arrow is as big as an ICBM. And Maxwell Smart sees the giant bow and arrow and says, "That's the second largest bow and arrow I've ever seen." And Meyer said, "I thought TV was just going to keep getting weirder and more wonderful, but now I look around and every show is just people exchanging insults in coffee shops."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is him in the 90s saying this.
Yeah.
Sort of that shrinkage of the strangeness and the weirdness. But you are exactly right. What do people do in coffee shops? They are on their laptops. And I would say today that the real third space that is not home and work, and if social capital lives anywhere, it's the internet.
Sure.
Right? For good and bad.
Right.
People congregate there. They buy things. It is a place of commerce, but they also organize there. They do social things there.
Sure.
There's a lot of loneliness on the internet, but there's social capital too, right?
Yeah.
And so if, I would say that the kind of the question of how the social fabric is going to either unravel or survive kind of lives there.
Yeah, and I think it does go back to the idea of sort of like, if your boss is leaving you so tired at the end of the day that you can't go out and meet people in real space and do something productive with your time, you will end up in front of a passive medium.
Like
now,
TV. You watch a lot of WKRP.
Yeah, being blunted in front of the TV on beer, right. But the internet also encourages a lot of that passivity. I know, again, like you say, people are activists on the internet. They use it as a space to gather. But again, I don't want to sound old-fashioned, but there is no replacement for what kind of dynamics happen in a real world.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when it comes to political organizing, especially when it comes to like activism and it comes to that sort of thing.
True. That's true. There's a very good book by a friend of mine, actually, Fred Turner, called From Counterculture to Cyberculture. And
That is actually on my wish list.
It's an excellent book, and this is not the whole argument, but there's a neat story in there about the well, the whole whole Earth electronic network link or whatever it is, this early San Francisco BBS, bulletin board system, and that a lot of our rhetoric of how empowering and democratic the internet was going to be was first written by people like Howard Rheingold and Stuart Brand, who were all members of the well. Yeah. But what Turner points out is that the well owed a lot of its character to, A, the novelty, yes, of talking with people on the internet, but they actually all lived within 6 blocks of each other in San Francisco. And so it wasn't quite the same as this scattered, interaction.
It was like a literal bulletin board at a community center or a coffee shop.
Yeah, and that local, I think actually, that's a big hobby horse of mine in my day job, is about the power of scale in communication networks and the difference between a local network and a nation-spanning network or a grid, and that we have to find ways to preserve the benefits of local networks within the bigger network of networks that is the internet or the grid. But some people do use the internet to game together and to organize together, and some people make podcasts about old TV shows and sublimate their desire for a lost golden age of civic life that way.
WKRP in Cincinnati will be back after this.
We were just joking around about, on past episodes, Rob, about how we don't give Bailey or Jan Smithers her due. I thought she sold the hell out of that speech.
Yes.
Where, she doesn't want Johnny to leave. I mean, I think both of us are Bailey-Johnny shippers. We haven't talked about it, but I definitely love that pairing. And Bailey kind of, is like, don't go, Johnny.
Yeah.
So I thought Jan Smithers did a fantastic job selling that speech.
She gives the only genuine speech, right? Every other speech is funny or mixed up in some way, and Andy does. Andy's the one who kind of admits what they're all up to. But Bailey gives the only genuine speech, and I think, if you're a Bailey-Johnny shipper, that begins in these 2 episodes. This is the first indication we have of her having a crush on, or at least an affection for him. And she totally sells the hell out of it. I completely see what you said a couple weeks ago about her naturalistic line reading in comparison to some of the great comic actors on this show.
It's like she comes from a different show almost. And when she does, and it works, you kind of take a step back and go, oh, wait a minute. This is kind of how a real person might deal with this situation, as opposed to a outsized sort of, sitcom caricature.
Yeah, and so there really is very little suspense as to whether Johnny is really leaving or really coming back. But to the extent that there is any suspense and the sort of the emotional heft of this episode, a lot of it comes from Bailey right there, from her waiting for him to walk back in the door, and the closing credit cliffhanger.
Yeah. That was so odd that they just kind of, everything is so compact in these 2 episodes. They had to put the realization that Johnny had gone to LA over the closing, or under the closing credits, which is just, it's so efficient, It's just kind of like, it's kind of like a post-credit scene in an Avengers movie or something like that. It's like instead of eating shawarma, they're waiting for, Johnny to come into the station.
Waiting for Johnny to return. And so the episode just closes on that doorway.
All right, it's 5:27 in the morning on WKRP in Cincinnati. I'm your new host from midnight to 6 a.m. My name is Heavy Early. And it is. And I'm here with music. Music for people who don't have anything better to do than stay up all night listening to music. With me talking occasionally in between the records.
Well, the second episode in our pair of Johnny leaving and Johnny coming back episodes is called Johnny Comes Back.
Yeah.
So, Rob, the plot of this episode is they have to find a replacement for Johnny in the mornings, and a helpful independent says, I know somebody who'd be perfect for you, Doug Winter. Doug comes in. For some reason, Andy hires him. Apparently, Andy is very susceptible to unctuous sort of flattery. And Doug ingratiates himself with the suits at the station, which I found really interesting. But we find out, of course, that Doug is on the take. He is taking payola in the form of cocaine. And as Johnny comes back, this is actually a really full episode now that I think about it. As Johnny comes back, because his LA venture did not work out, he has to be relegated to the, midnight to 6 shift. And he takes on his newest nom de plume, Heavy Early.
Heavy Early, that's a great name. Great name and a great scene. Yeah, there is a lot going on here. So Johnny comes back. They don't drag that out very much. Johnny is back about 10 minutes into the episode, which means that Johnny's time in Los Angeles amounts to about 10 minutes of TV screen time.
Yeah, exactly. It's weird.
And instead we have this whole other payola plot. And it is jam-packed. There's 3 guest characters here. We have Murray, the sleazy record promoter. We have Doug Winter, the DJ on the take. And then, for no real reason that I can see, we have another DJ, Mason Noble. You said back in the Hold Up episode, you used the phrase Chekhov's DJ. If we see a DJ in the opening scene, he's got to go off by the end of the episode. But Mason doesn't go off in this episode, except in the sense that actor, Sam Anderson, is going to come back. He's on he's on every season of WKRP. He returns as a different character.
Oh, yeah. And that was really common for TV shows, even serialized TV shows, to do.
And, Sam Anderson, to his credit, makes the most out of that 3 minutes of screen time. I find Mason Noble, I don't know what purpose that serves in the plot, but it's in a funny, amusing little exchange. And he's a total, hey, it's that guy. He's done 100 things. He was on Angel, he's on ER, he was on Lost. He's Bernard. He's one of the Tailies on Lost.
Holy shit, that was Bernard! Oh, my God!
Yeah.
Of course. That's where I recognized him from. Wow. Yeah. That's a great that guy right there.
Yeah. Justified. He's one of the rich, evil guys on middle seasons of Justified.
Jesus. Unbelievable.
Mason, I just want to start by saying that what we're looking for in a new morning man is individuality.
Oh, hey, Mr. Individuality, that's me, Andy. I like to think of myself as not just unique, but different. Well, for example... Yeah, this is Mason Noble here with the sounds that abound and sometimes astound, and it's all planned, especially for you. Hey.
That's nice.
Yeah, I think right. Yeah, it almost rhymes, Andy. Yeah, it is, Andy. Right.
Yeah, so Johnny does not have success in L.A., and it's ironically for the same reason that he lost his job in L.A. originally. He can't control himself on the mic, and he says something, and Rob, it's really interesting because it's not bleeped out, but it is silenced, and we get to see the reactions of the entire cast to what he says, so we are left to fill in the blanks, and this goes to my newest comedy theory, which is that bleeping is always funnier than cursing.
Yes.
You see this in Arrested Development. I know I've seen the unedited, uncensored pilot of Arrested Development. It's not as funny as the bleeped version. And here, it's the same thing. Our imaginations are left to fill in the blanks on what Johnny possibly could have said in 1979 that got him fired as easily as Booger did in 1970.
That's right. So in an interview, Hessman has recalled that what he was saying, he says, it turns out you can say Booger now on the radio, but you can't say blank. And in an interview, he recalls that it was either you or tough shit. But the rumor, and what I've seen people say online, and I actually think, looking at his lips, that I find this more believable, is that what he's saying is jive ass, which is funnier.
Yeah.
It's a lot funnier than him saying you. I just don't see that. But
absolutely. It's funny, you were saying the end of the sentence there, and you said blank. All I could think of was the Match Game, which is another 70s artifact, Johnny Fever got fired from the radio station in L.A. for saying blank, and then you go to, Charles Nelson Riley at that point.
Have you heard about Charles Nelson Riley?
Yes, one of a
Yes,
trio.
I have, as a matter of fact.
Gently,
Have you heard about Charles Nelson Riley?
Gently.
Well, he got a blank while streaking. What did
Well,
you
I know
say,
he got
Jim?
arrested, but they had to release him for insufficient evidence.
So you just mentioned the playlist, whether or not Johnny is choosing his own songs. That, of course, leads into the resolution of this episode, which is that there's a little mini payola scheme going on at WKRP. As rock and roll exploded in the 1950s, the importance of the DJ also exploded. And really the popularity of rock and roll, or its rapid growth, can be attributed in part to a couple of really important trendsetter disc jockeys, people like Alan Freed. they had a lot of influence in terms of the records they chose to play, had a lot of influence in terms of the records that became hits. So obviously, it was in the interest of record companies to keep DJs happy and even to pay them to promote certain songs.
Sure.
This had been going on. For decades, but it came to a head in the 1950s payola scandals. And I think the reason it came to a head then, even though it had been going on for years, was because of a kind of culture war over the type of music that was being played.
Yeah.
ASCAP, which represented the kind of older white composers from the Tin Pan Alley kind of music.
Sure.
They complained that BMI, their kind of upstart competitor associated with sort of more racially mixed R&B, rock and roll music, as BMI and that kind of music exploded, ASCAP cried foul and accused BMI of promoting payola. And this went back and forth and became more and more of a stink. And then in the wake of after the TV quiz show scandals,
right,
in 1957, 1958, when it was determined that the TV show 21 was rigged, Congress turned its attention to payola, and there were congressional anti-payola hearings, a U.S. House committee investigating corruption in the record industry. So Alan Freed testified. Dick Clark, of course, another important, influential DJ in these days, had to testify. And, I mean, long story short, basically Freed took the fall for what everyone in the music business was doing. I think Freed became the symbol of payola, and he had probably taken money. He got fired. He was charged with commercial bribery, fined. I think he had a suspended jail sentence, but it destroyed his career. And he could never work again in radio. And I think he drank himself to death. He died only a few years later.
He did. Yeah. He died in the mid-60s. It's kind of interesting to watch the payola hearings as kind of a microcosm of what happened earlier in the 50s with HUAC. And, essentially Dick Clark named names. I mean, he voluntarily divested himself of all of his music business investments. He still ended up being a multi-millionaire because he played ball. And, Alan Freed didn't and got fired and drank himself to death.
Yeah. And so, the outcome of the payola hearings and the payola scandal, it's a lot like the quiz show scandals, actually. If you've seen the terrific movie Quiz Show, the outcome of the payola scandal, like the quiz show scandal, is that the sort of disreputable and often ethnic middlemen took the fall, leaving the kind of whole corporate superstructure intact. At the end of Quiz Show, the network guys say, well, we're just going to make the shows easier. Nobody really cares about the questions and answers. They're just watching the money. Right? And in the same way in radio, they destroyed Alan Freed. I'm not saying there was no corruption. Of course this was corrupt. People were making payoffs. I mean, what is playing a song on the radio if not an ad for that song?
Exactly.
So Freed took the fall. They cleaned house. And that's why there's no corruption or collusion in the music industry today.
Your name is what?
Barney Schlock. I got this little record company. Obscurity Records?
It would be,
Look, I know the probe is on, but I got a record here that's got to happen. High School Ooh-Ooh by Clyde Ankle. How's about it, baby? You want to jump on it?
Crazy. Lay it on the floor.
Much. All right, you'll see. The kids will eat it up. They think that's good singing.
Is it?
Well, not really, baby, but don't tell the kids I said so, huh? Us little rock and roll labels got a good thing going. We pay off a few guys in the key cities here, rig a few charts there, bingo, a new hit parade. And that's how rock and roll was born.
Yeah, I'm hip.
Look, kid, if you don't want bread, what do you need? A little dental work? Trip to Vegas?
Forget it.
Pre-1959 cranberries?
You're all heart, Barney.
Heart?
That thing right behind your shoulder holster.
Huh? Oh, yeah. So, you don't want to give High School Ooh a ride then, huh?
Only on a rail.
Oh, listen, kid. Payola's the only way a little record artist can get off the ground.
Yeah? Did you ever hear of Talent?
No, who does he record for?
Look, nothing really good ever had to pay to get played, only junk. The majority of disc jockeys never played ball with you at any price, but that's all over now. You've been benched.
I have?
And not a moment too soon. If your game had gone on much longer, the kids would have forgotten what music sounded like.
I've almost forgotten myself.
And so we see what happens is that the rep from Onslaught Records, this independent record promoter that sort of acts as a third party, he's a cutout. he basically hands the records and a little bit of cocaine to Doug. And that dates this episode better than anything else, not just because of the fact this is the form the payola takes, in the form of an independent record promoter, but also, Rob, the fact that it's coke.
Cocaine, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of getting us from that late 70s mellow that we talked about in the pilot with the doctor on Quaaludes or pot into, sort of a more fast-paced corporate 1980s that we're on the verge of here.
Right.
With the appearance of cocaine.
If we said a couple of weeks ago that Hold Up was like a concentrated late 70s episode, Welcome Back, Johnny feels to me like the first really 80s episode of this show.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know that decades don't work that way. We don't all wake up on January 1st, 1980 and throw out our bell bottoms and replace them with big shoulder pads. But, there's kind of a blurring. It takes a few years. I really like, there's a writer, Josh Glenn, he has a website called High Lowbrow, and for years he's been writing these really detailed essays on the generations and on the decades. And for him, he says that every decade begins and ends in the year ending with a 3. So the 70s go from 1973 to 1983, the real 70s, and the real 80s go from 1983 to 1993. But whatever, there's a blending period. And this episode feels like, you look at Mason Noble with his nascent comb over and his sweater tied around his shoulders.
Yeah.
You look at Doug Winters with his double-breasted blue suit with the big shoulders. The cocaine plot line, of course. The sound and the name of this fictional band, the Soundtastics playing Nowhere Band. I feel like, if it's not the 80s, you can certainly hear the 80s knocking at the door.
Yeah, absolutely. The Soundtastics, Nowhere Band. So, Rob, when I watched this episode, they play a couple of snippets from that song.
Yeah, this is the song that Murray is really promoting with his bags of Peruvian foot powder.
Yeah. Oh, the big guy, he's got a monkey on his foot. And, Carlson, Carlson's
can we pause just for a moment to give due credit to that wonderful ending?
Carlson's no fool, man. He's going to use it on his feet.
He starts stamping, and I got a monkey on my foot.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But yeah, Nowhere Band, it appears a couple of times, just little snippets, 5-10 seconds. Rob, I am convinced that was a real song. Or I was convinced when I watched this show. Something about the tune, the melody, it connected somewhere in my head, and I said, wait a minute, that's not a real song? And we did the research, and no, it was just basically a song made for WKRP, just to fill some time and to have a fictional band as part of a fictional record label that they could accuse of doing payola. So completely 100% fictional, but I watched this episode. I was convinced that it was a real song. It came back to me immediately. I remembered the tune, a little bit of the lyrics, and I felt like my brain could have filled in the rest of the verses in the chorus, but it's not. It's not real.
It's not real. WKRP, it is, based on the 10 seconds we hear, very believable as a 1979 top 40 contender.
Yeah, it is. It sort of sounds like it. It acts like, what's really funny is that right before, one of the songs that Doug plays right before he plays Nowhere Band is a song by Styx. Yeah. And Styx was admittedly involved in some payola scandals in the late 70s. So I wonder if that was a in-joke among in-jokes to the cognoscenti who knew the radio business and the music business watching this show. Like,
But you talking about remembering or thinking you remembered this as a real song, this points to something that this has been happening to me throughout this podcast, but it definitely happened with this pair of episodes. Just the weird experience of remembering bits and pieces of things really well and then other things not well at all. And for some reason, these two episodes that we've talked about today really were particularly murky for me. I don't know if they were shown less often in syndication. I was about 10 minutes into Goodbye, Johnny, thinking I had never seen it before and finding it very strange until we got to Unwanted Baby Chicks, and I said, I swear to God, thought we were supposed to bring our wives, and I said, of course I've seen this episode, but did you find these episodes just a little bit fuzzy or indistinct or weird watching them?
Well, again, we've talked about the video quality and how it kind of dips and peaks precipitously throughout the again, no fault of Shout Factory, obviously. These are off of videotape. And as we've talked about in past episodes, you don't have a lot of choice when it comes to the versions of shows you get on videotape.
Yeah, so the video quality, I think, is a little darker in both these episodes, especially the latter.
Yes.
Although Goodbye Johnny opens with what I found a really creepy establishing shot of people shoveling snow. And anytime they go outside, anytime they shoot a little bit of video outside, I think it's always a recipe for danger. I think of Andy and Linda strolling in the park in that terrible montage. There's a weird scene I had no memory of in Hold Up where Andy and the big guy are driving over to Dell's Failure. And it's shot from above. It looks like Grand Theft Auto 1978 or something.
That's great. I mean, that's it.
And then this shot of the Cincinnati weather, on my TV, it kind of came, the snow was sort of this sickly yellow. I thought it was like something out of Cormac McCarthy's The Road or something like that.
Oh my God. Yeah, and so this kind of gets me to where I wanted to go with this, which, by the way, welcome. This is our weekly feature, The Cincinnati Triangle, where we talk about the weird and the unknown and the supernatural in WKRP. And this week it's a little more personal because, I was watching the beginning of Welcome Back, Johnny, Rob, and I saw the video quality, a little dark, a little fuzzy, and it just started to kind of melt before me. I swear I was not on any substances whatsoever when I was watching this. But it's kind of started to melt before my eyes. Then the Soundtastics song came on. Everything kind of, it was a very uncanny, unheimlich feeling. It was very odd. And I want to kind of go off on a tangent on this because nostalgia, as we've been suffused in it the past couple of months, we are diving deep into our own memories and collective memories in a way of everybody who's watched this show. We've also learned a lot of other listeners have never watched one episode of this show. And there's this idea that all of these memories are kind of wrong, slightly off. And we talked about it with the alternate endings to the contest episode. Our memories are not reliable. Videotape is, quote, reliable. And we have to kind of deal with the differentiation between those two realities. Yesterday, after I watched the episodes, I managed to find one of the many retro channels that are now polluting the airwaves. I say polluting because I'm beginning to get a little bit like I've gorged on nostalgia and I'm feeling a little sick to my stomach about it.
Yeah, nostalgia. We just released the episode where we dug into the turkey drop. And I've been thinking of books like Foucault's Pendulum, where the people start playing around in conspiracy theory and goofing on this stuff. And they always begin thinking it's just a lark and it's just a joke. But, we are digging deep into our own subconsciousness and into the past. And sometimes there's blowback, I mean, we're like the dwarves in the mines of Moria. We've delved too greedily and too deep. What have we awoken in the darkness of Khazad-dûm?
And that's kind of where I wanted to go with this because the uncanniness of memories of these types of shows. I mean, WKRP, we admit, we both know, we feel it's quality, it's got great writers, great actors, but there's a lot of stuff out there that hasn't aged as well. So I was flipping through the channels yesterday, and, my wife and I watched a couple episodes of Partridge Family, didn't hold up well, but didn't make me feel like my skin was crawling. It was just kind of like, okay, Partridge Family, Brady Bunch, that whole sort of early 70s family sitcom. And then the Retro Channel decided to treat us to an episode of a show that was syndicated in the 80s, and again, kind of the death knell of that whole producing a series for syndication period.
It wasn't.
And a lot of the younger folks on my Facebook friends list had very fond memories of it. Small one.
Oh.
This show is garbage. All right, it's horrible. It's this sort of like we need to fill a half hour on television. Let's just point cameras at a bunch of really, really bad actors and see what happens.
Well, it's badly done, but it also, I know exactly what you're saying.
Everything about it is creepy.
It passes beyond just simply being incompetent to being actively malevolent.
I was going to say hostile to the audience. Like
yes.
It takes a lot to make a stew.
A pinch of salt and laughter too.
A scoop of kids to add the spice.
A dash of love to make it nice. And you've got
too many cooks.
Too many cooks.
Too many cooks. Too many cooks. Too many cooks.
Too many cooks.
Too many cooks.
You can't talk that way. That's your sister. That's a fine how do you do laugh track.
This is the worst case of intronitis I've ever seen.
You can even hear the theme music.
And the thing is, we have no idea how contagious this strain is. Now look.
Scuba kids to have a spice.
A dash of love to make it nice. And
Kill me.
you got too many cooks, too many cooks, too many cooks.
Kill me!
Too many cooks.
The entire sort of idea of the show is that inventor builds a little child robot. The child robot is basically a slave for the family. It goes that far. So in this particular episode, there was an evil version of the robot because
the one with the evil. Oh, you really dug too greedily and too deep.
Listen, I didn't choose this episode to be on. I didn't go on to Netflix and say, "Oh, let me call up Small Wonder," season 3, episode 8. It was just on.
Mike.
And as I watched it, I was live blogging it on Facebook, and if you are a friend of mine on Facebook, you may have seen us talking about all of our really uncanny memories of these shows. And I don't have any memory of this particular episode or this show at all. But
this is all starting to sound like some, including you doing the live blogging, it's starting to sound like the premise for some, I don't know, either a modern J horror movie or maybe a creepypasta storyline or something like that.
I know. I did invoke Candle Cove, which I will link to in the show notes.
Cove.
That's kind of what I wanted to get at, this idea of being haunted by the past. And it's actually a really popular field of study right now, especially in Britain. It's called hauntology, and it comes from a presentation that Jacques Derrida did in the years after the Berlin Wall fell about what will sort of our post-communist, our post-Manichaean Cold War world look like. And, he says that this idea of fetishizing commodities and everything, it's going to create this sense of haunting, of nostalgia among the generation that grew up in the sort of ashes of the Cold War. And in Britain, a lot of artists, visual artists, musicians, have taken this idea of a haunting kind of nostalgia and kind of warped it and rebrought it into the sort of the modern era. So the 1970s in Britain, you have tons of TV series that have these kind of like very creepy premises, Children of the Stones. There's a lot of old 1970s educational type film strips that these musicians and artists sample. There's a great book, Ghosts of My Life, which I would recommend to anybody who's at least a little bit interested into this whole idea of hauntology. You've got bands like The Advisory Circle, Bellbury Polly. These are sort of the British bands that kind of use those, educational film strips. You've got the author Mark Fisher, who wrote Ghosts of My Life. You've even got sort of humorous takes on it, like that great blog Scarfolk, which which gives you this sort of
love that
creepy occult town in Britain that has never moved out of the 70s. And the past can be kind of poisonous. It's not for nothing that the idea of nostalgia being poison. You remember Don Draper talking about that in the Carousel episode of Mad Men.
Right.
It's not for nothing that is a thing, because you can fall backwards in time and you can get kind of stuck there and things aren't exactly as you remember them, and that causes that sort of cognitive dissonance.
I think I've seen you post about some of these things, but I have not explored them. I think I know what dangerous rabbit hole I am going down this evening. If I don't come back for next week, send out a search party.
That's excellent.
Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it. We're online now at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which wasn't taken, and will be up soon on iTunes and the other one. Good day, and may the good news be yours.
Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser is recorded before a live studio audience.